Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared creates collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. So my interview today is with Andrew McCarron. He's a professor at Trinity School in Manhattan. He's on the faculty there, and he's the head of the Religion, Philosophy, and Ethics Department. So imagine we had nothing to talk about. What's really important, though, is that what we did talk about was not really religion, philosophy, or ethics in a sense, I suppose. We talked about Bob Dylan and about Andrew's new book, Light Come Shining, subtitled The Transformations of Bob Dylan. I'll read a little quote here, a new biography of Bob Dylan that looks at turning points and transformations in Dylan's life, close quote. We talk a little bit about Bob Dylan's humanity, about his youthful edge and his desire for social and political change of various sorts, and of course about his transformations. I love Andrew's notion of this world-weary quality. We talk about the blood of the land being in his voice and about the immediacy of his work and how it can apply to pretty much everything. So I hope you enjoy it. Stay tuned. Andrew McCarron coming up. Don't forget davidpecklive.com for more information about my own speaking, writing, and podcasting, rabble.ca. You can find out more information about booking me to speak. And also, if you really want to support the work I'm doing, which seems to be the way things are going on these podcasts, you can do that through patreon.com. Andrew McCarron coming right up. Well, welcome to Face to Face. We're joined by a very special guest today out of New York City, I believe in Manhattan, actually. Andrew McCarron is here with us today. He's on faculty at Trinity School in Manhattan, and he's the head of the Religion, Philosophy, and Ethics Department, and we're here today to talk about his new book. Andrew, thank you for taking the time to spend with us today.
David, it's an absolute pleasure. Happy to be speaking to you.
So the book's called Light Come Shining, The Transformations of Bob Dylan. I read the first review several weeks ago and was immediately not only interested but intrigued. I've been a fan of Bob Dylan's for years. I wouldn't call myself a crazy fan, Andrew, but definitely Dylan kind of introduced me to music. My brother was and is still 3 years older than I am, and I remember being quite young and the cassette tapes of Bob Dylan and Simon and Garfunkel. Wednesday.
Parallel experiences. I have a similar set of memories from
interesting.
My older brother.
Oh, that's awesome. That's fantastic. Well, the Simon and Garfunkel album was Wednesday morning, 3 a.m., and I think it was a greatest sort of hits compilation of Dylan's that we listened to. And then, of course, kind of went with Bob through his Christian phase, and then kind of coming out of that and kind of his own transformation. And that's kind of, I think, maybe that's what caught my eye, your subtitle, The Transformations of Bob Dylan. So you've been a Dylan fan for years?
Yeah, I have, but you mentioned crazy fans. There are a lot of those who know everything about the guy, who have listened to every outtake, who know the entire discography.
Right.
I like you, I was certainly aware of Bob Dylan through my older brother and my parents, but I didn't really start listening to him. I think it was probably at some point after I graduated college. So let's see, that would be, I graduated college in the late 90s.
Okay.
So maybe around 1999, I had been given an album from, let's see, I guess it was from the late 1980s.
Okay.
Which I write about in the book called Oh Mercy. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I'm actually not. I hate to say it, but I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, well, I don't think everyone has heard of this album, but it's a fantastic album, and there was one song in particular called Most of the Time on the album. And I remember clearly driving with a few friends from a hike in the Catskill Mountains of New York State, and just responding to the world-weary quality of Dylan's voice. There was something just so unmistakably human about it that I was drawn in immediately. And at that point, I started really listening to Bob Dylan. But I got into what I'll refer to provisionally as later Dylan first.
Okay.
And then gradually made my way back to the classic albums of the mid 1960s, Highway 1, Highway 61 Revisited, and Blonde on Blonde, so on and so forth.
Right.
I started at a later point of
so you were a late convert.
I think so. Yeah.
I just punched up "Oh Mercy," and you know what? As soon as I saw the album artwork, I do know the album. That's the album with "Everything Is Broken" on it.
Precisely.
Yeah, and I do know the song most of the time. So that might have been one of the sort of the last albums that I bought of Dylan's before sort of not moving on, but just I joke with people and say the last record I bought was the Joshua Tree by U2. I've been what was that, 87 I think?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean that's not quite
mid-80s.
That's not quite fair, but anyway, tell me about that world weary quality, because I know so many people that just, wow, that's an interesting take on Bob Dylan. He's got, he just doesn't have a great voice, and yet you saw something so human and so I guess gritty would be a good word, maybe.
Yeah, gritty. He refers to it as in one song off of the album "Together Through Life" as the having the blood of the land in my voice. I think that's the lyric. Yeah, there's a timeless quality to it. It's really hard to explain, but as I'm sure you would agree, that some voices just continually pull people in. I know that in I don't know. Have you read Dylan's memoir Chronicles? Chronicles Volume 1.
I have not.
Highly recommend it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a fascinating read. I'd like to read more of that sort of thing from Dylan. But in it, he describes listening to Johnny Cash's voice. And Dylan had a similar, I think, response to hearing Johnny Cash's voice over the radio during his teenage years. I forget the exact language, but Dylan describes it as a sound as if Johnny Cash were at the edge of a fire. And that the voice was so big that it made the world grow small.
W.H. Auden says something about, as an artist, we constantly have to live our lives as if we were in a state of siege. We're under attack. There's something, and I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that necessarily, that sort of militaristic kind of metaphor. However, I think I know what he meant. Is that kind of what you think about Dylan, about Johnny Cash? Is that what Bob Dylan was sort of suggesting about On the Edge of a Fire? Is that?
I think so. Right. It's the sound of someone who isn't necessarily trained, who vocally, who doesn't have a melodious voice, but who has to sing. Who has to sing.
Who can't not sing.
You can't not sing.
Right.
There's this immediacy to it, and I guess thinking across the arts, that quality, I think, consistently appeals to me. Jack Kerouac, Charles Bukowski, Emily Dickinson. These are all writers who, for whom the act of composition was an absolute existential necessity, that it had to happen.
Not sure why this happened, but yesterday, my son's 11. And, of course, we watched a little bit of the Grammys on Sunday night, and one of his favorite bands wins a Grammy. And so I feel as if, I say to him last night, I said, you know what, Spencer, I think it's time we started going back a little bit. And I guess maybe just thinking about you and what we were going to be doing today, I punched up Subterranean Homesick Blues, and the video, and Bob standing there with the cards, you know, and
With
just,
Allen Ginsberg in the background.
it's just too great, right?
Yeah.
And too amazing. And my son was in. He really was. But there was this, I guess I was trying to bridge that gap a little bit, but he was kind of fascinated, but not totally sold. And I wonder if that's something that he'll come back to later. Like that you talk about that what was the phrase you used? The world weary quality.
The world weary quality.
And it's a part of all art, it seems to me. Right? I mean, you could say that there's this a great painter can't not paint, a great writer can't not write. That there's a desire, there's a need, there's a must to quality about it.
Yeah, and maybe when it comes to that world weary quality in your son Spencer, who you mentioned was 11.
11.
Maybe we need a little experience under our belts.
Right.
To understand what's at stake and what's
it's good.
Right? Yeah, that's what I would suggest. And I think that's probably why I really began leaning into Dylan's work when I did, early 20s, as opposed to earlier, where I think that my aesthetic tastes were had less of that gritty quality.
Is there a sense in which? So I watched the video last night with Spencer. I mean, there's a sense, I would so love to hang out with Dylan and chat to him and go a little deeper. I mean, even at that young age, I get the sense that there was something really deep and substantive. And I don't know, maybe was there a brokenness there that was feeding into his, I just kind of wonder why there was such a depth for him at such a young age.
Yeah, that's a fascinating observation. I know that in all the reading of the various interviews that I did in preparation for writing Light Come Shining, and my goodness, there's a lot out there for someone who has a reputation for not wanting to talk to journalists. I mean, you'd be surprised how many interviews Dylan has given.
Right. Right.
I had to. It's probably in these thousands of pages. But one thing that was that consistently came up when Bob Dylan was reflecting upon his younger years, and this is something that he also writes about in Chronicles, Volume 1, is his sense that the end of time, the end of history was in fact imminent, and that there was seriously a finite space of living for him to try to actualize himself. And you might be wondering, well, why did he feel that the history was coming to an end? Well, it was because he came of age during the Cold War, and he writes and sings and talks about the apocalyptic anxiety that maybe deepens him on some level, rattled him existentially.
Sure.
It made him feel as if, again, that whatever he was meant to do on Earth, he had to do as quickly as possible.
So do you think that had to do with him personally? You talked a little bit about what sounded like sort of self-growth and sort of existential awareness, I guess. Or do you think he had a greater sense of the greater good? Of I've got to give back, or was he creating art for art's sake?
That's a great question. I guess a little bit of both. But my sense is that it's largely for him has always been about self-actualization. That he's resisted the moniker of protest singer,
right?
Consistently through his life. I don't think he sees himself as much of an activist. I think that the activism, the protest singing that he did during the '60s was really quite genuine, but it was an offshoot of his involvement with folk music. I think that which of course promulgates political involvement. I think that it was part of the aesthetic identity that he was very much ensconced in at that moment. At that moment in his life. I mean, there's this Miles Davis quotation that I love. I love so many of Miles Davis's quotations, but it's sometimes it takes you a long time to sound like yourself.
Mm.
Again, sometimes it takes you a long time to sound like yourself, and I think that for Bob Dylan, that based upon everything I've read and what I've read that others have written on him, I think that's been the central imperative.
Finding yourself, it seems to me, is about honesty. It's about, living in a community. It's about having authentic relationships with people who can be real with you and so on. And I know we could talk about what all those words mean, but is it possible that Dylan's sort of timeless quality, it's a lot of things, I suppose, but it has to do with how honest and how and gritty. Back to that word, gritty. His music and his lyrics really are.
I think so. Yeah, I think that would be appealing. That people would see something. Listeners would feel something distinctly human, and that perhaps is inside all of us. Yeah.
Like he's saying, like he's saying what we can't, and he's saying it, and he's shouting it from the mountaintops.
That's right. There's this not to quote everyone else and refrain from saying anything original, but at the beginning of one of the chapters in Light Comes Shining, I begin with this epigraph from Saul Bellow that. The dream of man's heart, however much he may distrust and resent it, is that life may complete itself in significant pattern, some incomprehensible way before death.
Wow.
I find that so incredibly haunting, and I agree with what you were suggesting before. I think Bob Dylan embodies this sort of phenomenon. Of life completing itself in a significant pattern before it's too late, before death.
Well, there's a part of me, Andrew, that wonders if singers and writers and lyricists, forget about his music, but lyricists who write so honestly and so openly and with such breadth, it's crazy to me how much he's written. The Nobel seems like a no-brainer.
I think so too. There are many people disagree.
I know.
Yeah.
But it, I wonder, that it's almost like a melancholic worldly edge. He sees something that maybe we all see, but we just can't put our finger on. We all have this sense of discomfort with the way the world is. We're uncomfortable also with uncertainty, and yet, here's a guy who's laying it out for us in a remarkable and I think melodic way. I suppose not everyone does, but
right. No, I think so too. That generative, the actualization of that generative impulse, is so manifest in his life space, in his example. Yeah.
What do you think? What such a young age to start writing that way? Does great art? For me, it's kind of great art come out of experience, or does it come out of just some sort of prophetic voice? Obviously, it's not either or, I suppose. But what do you sense for Dylan?
Yeah, again, I don't know him. I've never met him. I doubt he'd want to talk to me, but
that's so funny. You've just written a book about him, but he wouldn't want to talk to you. Yeah, that's hilarious.
Yeah, I tried to get an interview, but I have a feeling that he'd rather chew glass than have a conversation about his inner life with a stranger.
Right.
But it's a great question. I think that in terms of the depth of his lyrics at such a young age. I mentioned the Cold War. I think that his historical moment, the fact that he was born, right during the Second World War, that his grandparents had been persecuted for being Jewish.
Yep.
There was an awareness of the Nazi Holocaust, certainly. I would also point to the Rust Belt of northern Minnesota, the fact that the landscape Bob Dylan was born into at that point had just been decimated ecologically by the mining companies.
Right.
So that's sort of the historical and ecological context that he was born into, which could certainly mature and deepen someone prematurely. Also, I think another thing to consider is the radio,
right.
The auditory culture that Dylan was raised in. I know that he continually, in these interviews and his autobiographical writings, and in some of the lyrics as well, cites the influence of the radio in his life. There's this quote from Chronicles that I have here somewhere. Let me just look at the book. Here it is. It goes as following. Back then, when something was wrong, the radio could lay hands on you and you'd be all right. So there's this oracular quality when it comes to the radio. But in terms of what he was listening to, pop music as pop, it didn't exist at that point. He wasn't listening to songs about teenage angst,
right,
and driving in fast cars. Of course, there was some of that in early rock and roll, but mostly he was listening to the blues, to high lonesome hill music. The music that came out of Appalachia. And gospel,
right.
These genres that just ooze with existential experience, and I think a lot of that was deeply internalized.
Do you think he became a poet? Did the guitar allow him to become the poet, or do you think he would have been a poet either way? I mean, you don't have to write anything down to be a poet. It seems to me that poetry is about observing and about taking it in and about wonder and mystery and all those things. But yeah, I just wonder if Bob Dylan would have been the musical legend that he is today without a guitar.
It's a great question. I have no idea. I know that he started with the music. He was drawn to the guitar and the piano first, and then the lyrical genius, and I feel comfortable, as I imagine you do as well, calling it that.
Yes, without a doubt.
Evolved over the sonic scape of the music. Would he have been a poet had he not been called to play the guitar, play piano, and play harmonica? I don't know.
It's an impossible question to answer. It just makes me wonder.
Imagine, I would imagine so. I know that he has cited being pretty darn inspired as a teenager by the Beat poets in particular. But let's see, he cited Jack Kerouac's Mexico City Blues, Allen Ginsberg's poem from the mid-'50s, of course, Howl, and also the work of Gregory Corso. In particular, those three he claims to have been drawn to as a teenager.
See, I guess,
while in Hibbing.
Andrew, this is what fascinates me. What makes this young guy, I mean, I don't know how old he was, but wasn't he in his teens when the first album came out? And was it 61, 62, something like that? Anyway.
I think we're 20 years old, 21,
so,
just 20.
So what draws a guy at that age to be reading that, to be reflecting, to be so aware politically, clearly, of what was going on and socially at the time? I mean, lots of people were, I suppose, but he did something about it. That's what I love. I'm always interested to know what is it that takes you to the next level. Okay, you can be pissed off about something. You can be angry, but he actually worked towards some kind of a transformation,
You mean like a socio-political sort of transformation?
Yeah, yeah. Like
Well, I mean,
he may say, "Listen, I wasn't the guy," but he must be able to be self-aware enough to look back and go, "Oh yeah, no, I had quite an influence."
yeah, definitely. I
You
mean,
know what I mean? I was a change maker.
I think that it was in part at least, I would imagine the influence of Woody Guthrie.
Hmm.
He does cite his exposure to Woody Guthrie. Yes, if my memory serves correct, that would be during the short period of time when he was a student at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis.
Right.
And, he does cite that as a transformative experience, not only in terms of the capacity of what he could do with his voice and the folk tradition, tradition plural that Woody Guthrie was drawing from, but also the activist piece.
Right.
I know that somewhere I read Bob Dylan had, as a young man, I guess at that point still Robert Zimmerman, had become tired of, I don't know, have you read On the Road recently by Jack Kerouac? Is that a novel that means anything?
No.
Okay. Well, there's a character in On the Road. It's about this figure named Dean Moriarty, based upon an actual person whose name was Neil Cassidy. And Dean Moriarty really lives for the moment, is responding to the world, but it ends there. There's no sort of follow-through. There's no creative project. There's no larger level of socio-political engagement with the world. And I think that the young Robert Zimmerman really felt transformed by the example of Woody Guthrie and tried to emulate his voice, his style of dress, his guitar and harmonica playing, but also his activism. I would say that based upon what Dylan has said, really was a catalyst at a young age.
Do you think there's? I mean, I think I know how I would answer the question, but do you think that music, music, maybe great art, great film, great poetry, do you really think it does change or can change the world?
Well, I'd certainly like to. I certainly like to think so. I mean, I know that. Look, the songs of the American Civil Rights Movement. Like I'm thinking of some of the classics, "Go Tell It on the Mountain,"
right?
"We Shall Not Be Moved," "We Shall Overcome," Nina Simone's "Mississippi Goddam." All of these songs, I definitely played a role in changing the world. So I would say yes. What's your thought?
Well, I sometimes wonder about the whole. I mean, listen, I love great film and literature and poetry and all of it. I was with my daughter at the art gallery recently for Mystical Landscapes and what's going on here at the HEO in Toronto, and we had a wonderful time together. And I think about the catalyst for change, and your subtitle, "The Transformations of Bob Dylan," and thinking and reflecting on the changes he's gone through in his life of self-reflection and asking deeper questions. And for me, that's just wonderful and marvelous and all that. But I wonder to what degree most of those folks are already there. So kind of that preaching to the converted kind of a thing. And. So I wonder if it actually, when people are listening to it because it's background music, maybe it's nothing more than background music, but maybe it's a little more either or than that in this case. I don't know, but just wondering what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I don't know. It's again, my impulse is to say yes, but but it is possible that these songs that could affect social change are the anthem for people who are already there.
Right.
And I mean, are there examples of songs that have really changed a worldview? I'm not enough of a musicologist to even begin to try to answer that question.
Right.
But it's certainly something that I plan to continue thinking about.
Well, and it's not any one thing, right? I suppose it's cumulative. It's great film. It's great music. It's great journalism. It's good relationship.
Poetry,
It's poetry. It's all these things sort of that come together. I'm just thinking. It just hit me as you were chatting. I remember years ago. I'd love to go back and see, and I forget what album it's off of, but the song "Things Change." I don't know, 15 years old, 18 years maybe?
Yeah, it came out right after around 9/11. It was the Wonder Boy soundtrack.
You know what? That's exactly what it was. The Wonder Boy soundtrack and Bob, I think Bob had a bit of a tough time on stage in that show, but I remember finishing, and the camera, as crazy as this sounds, the camera cuts to Michael Douglas. And I remember even then, and the look in his face, the applause, the standing ovation, immediately, there was this sense, I don't know, I just took away this sense that, wow, this guy's music meant so much to Michael Douglas, right? And it was
I could imagine that.
And it just makes me reflect on that time and place and emotional connection and spiritual connection and all those things when it comes to a great song or a great piece of art.
Sure. Yeah. There's a bit of a mystery there. But it certainly is powerful.
And I think that's what's kind of, for me, is so life-changing about when I think back on, Bob Dylan, U2, Simon and Garfunkel, some of the now I guess I'm dating myself now, but anyway, like I said, the last album I bought was the Joshua Tree, so take it from there. So
no one buys albums anymore.
That's right. Although there is a bit of a swing back, I think, right? The pendulum is coming back, to some degree. Your favorite Dylan song? Do you have one?
Yeah, I have so many. I like the song "Every Grain of Sand."
Every Grain of Sand, yeah. I know
Every Grain of Sand, I really like. I also really like. This is a popular later song, "Not Dark Yet," off of "Time Out of Mind" from 1997. There's a lyric in particular that I really like, and that's. I can't even remember what it was I came here to get away from. And I've seen Dylan perform over the past 10 years or so, many, many, many times. And, whenever he sings that particular lyric, I just feel that the words are so hauntingly familiar. Yeah, and I don't know what it is. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that I believe that who we are, that who we become grows out of the crumbling remnants of who we've been. And I think that really, at its heart, that's what my book, Light Comes Shining, is all about. In terms of the focus on transformation, reinvention in this particular very well-known life.
So it's a book about hope, and I think as I'm looking at the cover here, and the cover of the book, Dylan doesn't look too hopeful there, but I would kind of argue there's a truckload of hope in most of Dylan's writing.
Oh, definitely, an incredible amount of hope and perseverance, and the willingness to reinvent and to remain generative, and in a way that's similar in respects to, I think, say, Pablo Picasso.
Right.
Someone who remains very much involved in the experiment of living in new ways from youth until the shop closes, into the end of life. That's something that I really appreciate about Dylan's more recent life and music.
Well, listen, a fascinating conversation and a fascinating read. Light Come Shining, The Transformations of Bob Dylan. We've been talking today with Andrew McCarron. He's the head of the Religion, Philosophy, and Ethics Department at Trinity School in New York. Andrew, thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it, and I feel like we've barely scratched the surface.
Right. I feel so similar, and I thank you very much, David.